I came home from the Christmas party unwillingly. I would have stayed at Anna's, but her parents were in town, and my little apartment was not nearly as welcoming as it used to be in the days before this, Stitch creature came around. I keep thinking that I'm hearing thumping or windows opening, and it's freaking me out. But I came home anyway. I mean, maybe I just need a break from the case. Yeah. For Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I didn't touch those boxes once. The boss handed me a couple of cases for convenience store robberies that were easier to solve than a game of Clue. It was a nice distraction from all the gruesome imagery that I had been forced to see those past few days, but unfortunately Wednesday had come, and Anna wanted to work on the case. The sooner we start working again, the sooner it'll be over, she said, trying to convince me to work with her. I sighed and put the coffee that I was drinking down on my desk. Anna had put all the second victim-related evidence on a table in a conference room. It was the first victim's cousin, the man who'd stayed with her the night that she was murdered. Bill. I looked at the pictures of the crime scene first. He'd been killed in his room at the mental hospital where we'd been holding him. And the second was just as bloody as that of his cousin's, if not more so. The walls were covered in blood, handprints, and the bars on the windows weren't bent, meaning that Stitch must have found another way into the building. There were 2 beds in the room, one for Bill, one for his roommate. Both were messy and blood-stained. The red stood out vividly on the pristine white sheets. When I first got the pictures of his body, there was only half. His legs were lying on the floor, bones sticking out and sitting in a pool of his blood. His white hospital clothing was no longer white, but blood red, like Snow White's lips. My hand began shaking as I looked at more and more pictures of his mangled and missing body in the blood-soaked room. I felt my heart beating faster, like I was panicking. I didn't know why, though. Why should I panic? Stitch couldn't find me. So what do you think we should do? We don't really have any leads on who this guy is, Anna said, bringing me out of my terrified state. I pulled myself together so I wouldn't scare my partner. I don't know, I replied. Honestly, I didn't want to keep working on this case, but what choice do I have? I couldn't just leave Anna to handle it by herself. I couldn't convince the boss to let us do something else. And when a case got to us, it was because no one else could handle it and solve it. We were the top. I guess that's what comes with being the best detectives in the office. Some detective I am, though, can't even look at the pictures without shaking. I've been having nightmares, too. I was thinking maybe we could go interview the mental hospital staff who worked with Bill. We should probably go over the security tape footage and journal entries first, though. Didn't they diagnose him as post-traumatic stress disorder? Anna said. Yeah, I only took 2 psychology classes in college, but I remember that with post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of the time, therapists will tell their patients to relive the events so it wouldn't cause them that overbearing stress. So, I imagine that that's what his journal would be full of, just retellings of the story to help ease his anxiety. I don't know. I mean, we should probably go look through it, though, I said. I secretly hoped that she'd watch the video on her own and let me deal with the journals. But knowing her, knowing our jobs, that wasn't likely. Do you want to look at the videos or journals first? She asked. I shrugged. Take a gulp of my now cold coffee. Let's do this then, I said. God damn it, I thought to myself as she put the 4 discs into the 4 DVD players. They were all different cameras from the same period of time. For a while we just fast-forwarded. Bill stayed in his room, writing feverishly, while his fellow hospital patients wandered from room to common room. He only left when a nurse came to bring him to his therapy session. with the leading psychiatrist of the hospital. As it started to get dark, the patients made their way to their rooms, and Bill's roommate walked into the room, and Bill was still writing in his journal with a painful expression on his face. His roommate looked at him, concerned. There was no sound, but we saw him say something along the lines of, "Are you okay?" Bill looked over at him and told him shut up before that thing found him too, or something. His roommate looked away and leaned against the wall of his bed. He played with his thumbs for a while. And meanwhile, the nurses wandered the halls, locking the doors for the night, making sure everything was okay. After about 20 minutes of that, Bill and his roommate laid down for the night and fell asleep. It was dark, we couldn't see much, and the camera started turning to static. The images on the screen kept becoming distorted. The screens were all blacked out, and we were waiting for anything to happen when the image returned. Stitch was standing in the middle of the hallway. He trudged down the hallway, looking through every room's door window. To see if Bill was there, I guessed. While he systematically wandered the hall, Bill sprang to life and rushed from window to door and back again, looking for what woke him up. Stitch stopped looking for Bill and appeared to sniff the air. He took a couple of big sniffs and then turned his head. His face was looking toward the camera. You could see his teeth. His mouth wasn't fully closed. His teeth, they were vile. Black and yellow and green in every color that teeth shouldn't be. He opened his mouth and a little bit of blood fell out. He kept moving his head back and forth as if he was listening for something. He walked straight to Bill's room with determination in his steps and opened the door without touching it. Bill screamed, waking up his roommate. He flipped over on his side and sprang off the bed. He grabbed what turned out to be his writing pencil, and the cameras began to turn to static, cut in and out again. We could see bits and pieces of what was happening, both his roommate running around and Bill's roommate eventually ran out of the room. Bill had stabbed Stitch in his back. We're not sure how, but Bill's hand and the weapon just went through, like pushed out darkened blood and random chunks onto the floor, but it looked like he was struggling to get his arm back, as if his arm got stuck inside of Stitch's body, and Stitch grabbed him by the hair, whipped him with his rusty shackles, breaking his skin. After that, Stitch just stood there, standing over Bill. Maybe it made him feel powerful. Could he even feel emotion? I don't know. He just stood above him while Bill screamed, and I thought Stitch was raising his hand to strike or rip Bill's flesh, but he didn't. He just rubbed his hands together and rubbed his neck up to his face, and then, as fast as you could see a light turn on, his hands were on Bill's face. He started rubbing it, running his hands through his hair. Stitch started laughing at that point. Blood dripped on Bill's face and clothes. It was then that Stitch decided to attack. He tore bits of skin off this poor body and ate them like he'd never eaten before. He broke his body in half. Just tore it in half with inhuman strength, and the blood started to really pour then. As all of Bill's blood and guts spilled onto the floor, Stitch squatted down, started running his fingers along the edge of Bill's skin, where he ripped him in half. Stitch began eating his insides. All the while, it appeared that he was laughing, just as he did in the first murder. Stitch stood up and, well, he just stood there. He just stood there, facing the corner until the morning sun started to peek in through the bars of the window, and he was mumbling to himself, but since there's no audio in the security cameras, we couldn't make out what he was saying without bringing someone in who could read lips. I didn't hear Anna making any sounds. I wondered if I was the only one having a hard time with the case. I looked over and she was crying silently. I moved my chair, put my arm around her, rubbed her shoulder while we watched. I tried to hold myself together for her. and the door to the conference room slammed open, nearly giving both of us heart attacks. "Johnson, Reynolds, have an intern," the boss said, pushing a young man into the room. He left as soon as he'd come. We stood up. Anna wiped her eyes hastily and paused the video. "I'm Anna. This is, Ryan. I'm sorry that you have to come in at this time. We're working on a pretty nasty case." "Oh, I don't mind," he said. "It's bound to happen eventually, so I may as well get myself acquainted with murder. I'm John Freeman." He held his hand out to us and shook both our hands. "I think we've looked at enough evidence for now, Anna. Want to go to the mental hospital now?" I said. "Sure," Anna said. We headed out the door, with our new intern at our heels. With his slightly unkempt blonde hair, puppy dog-like blue eyes, he reminded me of a golden retriever. I felt bad ruining his innocence with this horrifying case. But that's just what happens when you're involved with police work. We made our way to West Seattle Psychiatric Hospital. It looked less welcoming than a medical hospital, just because of what lied within its walls. John looked at it with hesitation. I pushed him forward. If he wanted to be a cop, he'd have to learn to deal with situations that he didn't want to be in. And in this case, it was about as bad as it gets. So, if he could handle this, he could handle anything. We went into the building and found the nurses who had been involved with Bill and his treatment. They wore white uniforms like you saw in the movies, and were as kind as you'd expect nurses to be. "Hi, miss. I'm Ryan Johnson. This is my partner Ann Reynolds and our intern John Freeman. We're working on Bill and his cousin's case. We just have a few questions." "Of course," the first nurse said, nodding with a smile. Did you notice anything out of the ordinary with Bill's behavior before the attack? In the videos we saw him panicking moments before the killer came in, but not before then. We don't know what was normal or abnormal in his condition." "Well, he was always very agitated, always writing in his journal. The doctor told him to write his story down at least once a day, but he did it almost constantly. We think maybe he was desperate to get better or get out. He kept saying he needed to keep moving, or that thing, as he called it, would find him," the second nurse said. Anna wrote down some notes. "But you didn't notice anything abnormal?" I asked again. "No, nothing. Just his usual behavior." "Did you see anything lurking around the building at all, like before the attack or in the days preceding it?" I asked. "No, sir. Or, if the killer was here, he was very good at hiding it," the first nurse said. "Did you see which way the killer went after the attack?" I asked. The nurses both became quiet and turned a little pale. "No, sir," the first nurse said quietly. We saw him throw part of Bill out the window and follow, but we didn't see which way he went once he was on the ground outside." "Thank you for your help," I said, even though they really didn't give us any useful information at all. And they nodded. "Of course, anytime," the second nurse said. They turned around and continued with their work. We left in silence. Once we got into the car, I was irritated. How are we supposed to find this guy and put him behind bars, if that would even help, if we couldn't find a single lead? "That's just great," Anna said, sounding equally as frustrated. She sighed loudly. "Let's just work on some more tomorrow," I said. We drove back to the station. I got into my own car, drove back to my apartment reluctantly. Weird things had been happening ever since I first opened the boxes to this case. I kept hearing thumping at night and creaking like my windows were opening, but I wasn't sure if I was just hearing things or not. I could never find the sources of the sound. I opened my apartment door, half expecting Stitch to be waiting for me. I'd been becoming paranoid, scared. Just fact that I was becoming paranoid and scared was, it was scaring me. I walked into my apartment, finding no one inside. It was colder than I expected it to be. I wandered through all the rooms only to find what I hoped I wouldn't. My bedroom window was opened. I swear I'd locked it before I left. My hand shook as I closed it, and my heart started to race, and the panic was setting in again, and I turned on all the lights in my apartment on my way to the kitchen to make some comfort food. I made a giant sandwich, grabbed a can of soda, some chips, walked into the living room. Desperate to take my mind off that god-awful case, I turned on the TV, put on a funny movie, and I ate my food. Soon my mind was far from the case until I heard the thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It rang in my ears, echoed in my mind until I couldn't take it. I ran to my bedroom, grabbed my earplugs out of the bedside table. I shoved them into my ears to stop the thumping. My window was open. I still heard the thumping. That goddamn thumping. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely grab the phone. I dialed Anna's number as quickly as I could. Hey, Anna started. Anna, can I stay over tonight? I asked, cutting her off. Sure. What's wrong, Ryan? She asked. Please, don't tell me I'm not the only one having problems with this case, I said, nearly begging. Are you freaking out too? I swear I keep closing my window, but they're always open, she said, trailing off. I'll be over in 10 minutes. I hung up, packed a bag as quickly as I could. We both actually got sleep that night. We drove to work in our separate cars in case I decided to sleep at my own house that night, and neither of us wanted to dive back into the case. But instead of Anna making me, it was John that was making us. He reiterated almost exactly what Anna had said. Come on, guys. The sooner we start working, the sooner it'll be over. He was annoyingly chipper all the time. But I was friendly, and so was Anna, and we put the tapes back in and pushed play, and they started where they'd left off. John looked at them intently, taking notes about all the gruesome things Stitch was doing. I could hardly watch. Stitch picked up Bill's upper half like a bowling ball, sticking his fingers in Bill's eyes and mouth, and his hand was still embedded in Stitch's disgustingly naked body as he dragged him out into the hall. A trail of blood followed the poor dead man's body, when Stitch reached the window, he tore Bill's arms off and threw the rest of his body out the broken window. From the other angle, we could see Bill's roommate still cowering in horror. Stitch ignored him and tore the arm from his chest. Dark goo, like blood, came out with the arm, leaving a gaping hole where there should be something, anything. He didn't even seem to care. He put Bill's hand in his repulsive mouth and ate 3 of his fingers. I imagined the sound of crunching bones. He shuddered. He smiled at the camera as he eats Bill's remains. His teeth were rotted. His lips were still bleeding and his eyes still covered in sewn-on flesh. The video cut out again. When the image returned, Stitch was gone. Bill's arm was on the floor. His roommate was crying. I looked at Anna, who looked back at me. Maybe you should just live with me for a while. I'm too scared to live alone, she said quietly. and I was glad to know that I wasn't the only one scared out of my wits. Maybe the two of us together would be enough to keep Stitch away. We'd start looking at victim number 3 soon, after we had time to regain our sanity.